Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Speaking of Resilience podcast. I'm your host, Kate Madigan with the Michigan Climate Action Network. This podcast is also brought to you by the Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities. Today, our guest is Michigan State Representative Rachel Hood, representing Grand Rapids. This year, Representative Hood and Representative Hoytenga introduced a bipartisan set of bills to allow community solar projects to be built in Michigan. These bills are up for a hearing in the House Energy Committee very soon. The bills would allow people who don't own their own homes or have sunny rooftops to also benefit from solar. We talk about how community solar could lead to much more solar being built in our state, as has been the case in other states with this law. How the bills ensure that everyone can access community solar, including low-income residents, and how you can weigh in to show your support for community solar. Here's our episode on community solar with Representative Rachel Hood. It is really a pleasure to have you with us today, Representative Hood. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Happy to be here. I admire your work.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate so much your work. So you have introduced community solar bills into the Michigan legislature that will be having a hearing soon in the House Energy Committee. So can you tell us, what is community solar and why is this important in Michigan?
Sure. Community solar is a means through which three or more entities or individuals can come together, create a financing plan to develop a relatively large-scale solar installation on almost any viable property, and then sell the solar energy that is produced for a subscription to subscribers. It makes community solar makes accessing solar energy and clean energy very easy for individual purchasers of that energy source. And for some of us, myself included, who are not in a position to put solar on our rooftops, it's one of the most accessible ways that we can contribute to reducing our climate impact as individuals, as well as benefit from the cost savings of clean energy. And obviously, there's a community focus to it, so we can provide, that same access to our neighbors, which I think is a really powerful gift to our society at this point in our period of having recognized climates are changing.
Yes, and I read in preparing for this that there are millions of Michigan consumers and businesses who cannot, are basically shut out of solar because they don't own their own home or office. So they can't put it on their rooftop, or their rooftop isn't suitable for rooftop solar.
Yeah. Think about individuals who live in condo associations, or some individuals who live in historic properties are not able to install solar easily. Individuals who live in apartment buildings, or who are simply just renters would all be able to access a subscription for community solar, but may not be able to buy their own panels, finance that that investment, install everything, and benefit from the proceeds, both energy wise and cash wise.
And there are a lot of other states that already have community solar laws that allow this. So
yeah, it is a common tool, but here in Michigan, we haven't been able to achieve allowing a broad scope of partners to come together. There have been some early projects in East Lansing and in the greater Traverse City area, but here in Michigan, we have a real opportunity to scale up access to community solar. I'll point out that the utilities are also delivering community solar projects, but in a lot of those projects, the consumer doesn't get the return on investment that they may in a private project that doesn't involve one of the major utilities in Michigan.
I think that's a really important point because some of us are familiar with community solar in Traverse City or in Lansing. And I've looked at that as a, consumer. I've looked at the community solar in Traverse City and I was kind of like, oh, that's not the best deal. Especially when you look at what you're able to do if you can, put it on your own home or business.
Sure. Yeah. The return on investment is best when you are able to, qualify as one of those folks who can, finance their own solar project, which can be upwards of $40,000, depending on the size, somewhere between 25 and 40 in most residential cases. You would also, have to be able to win the lottery that the utilities have to be able to get the equipment necessary to sell the energy you generate back to the grid. So that requires some luck or patience, one or the other. And then you would have to, be able to have the capacity to work with contractors, find, the right folks to install that on your home. So it's a considerable investment of time and resources, and not everybody is game for such a big investment. And so much hard work. And I know in my case, on my own property, I have a 70-year-old sycamore tree that I really adore, and it provides a lot of value to my property in terms of, shading, keeping us cool in the summer, and then blocking wind from the river that I live next to during the winter. And I would not be able to put a 5 kilowatt project on my roof because of the shade that sycamore provides. But I could very easily imagine buying a subscription for a solar investment that's, down the street from me at the underutilized green space in my neighborhood. And I can imagine a lot of my neighbors wanting to do the same.
Yeah, I think that's a really great example. And there are so many people who, as you say, don't own their own home or business or property to build on, or who have a shady space. And then I also do want to say though that that investing in solar is cheaper than I just want to point out that solar is now cheaper in a lot of places than utility energy, which is still a majority fossil fuels. And so those who can build on their own property and can now get some of the financing programs that are available, it is actually cheaper than just getting whatever comes from your utility. So that's also a really exciting option that is growing in our state as well. So and so your bills, can you talk about what your bills would change if they become law?
Yeah, well, it calls for the Michigan Public Service Commission to set up a structure through which community solar would be allowable in the state of Michigan. Michelle Hoydinga is my partner in this effort. She has one bill and I have the second.
Great.
Some of I guess it gives a lot of, I'll start over. The bills give a lot of latitude to the Michigan Public Service Commission to design some of the details of implementation for the program.
And how would it work? Who would own and run the community solar projects and sell subscriptions?
Yeah, as I mentioned, an entity can be formed with as a minimum number of 3 partners, but you could have upwards of 50 to 100. Those entities would establish a governance structure. In many cases, I imagine this will be a board of directors who guide the project and make decisions. And then, work with subscribers on a regular basis to continue the project as it moves forward. Potentially there may be a time 14 years down the road that they need to find more subscribers, make capital investments in the solar installation, the array that they're operating, which would require leadership and decision making from that governing entity.
And so we really can look to, neighboring states like Minnesota, who have this authorizing law on the books that allow community solar, to see that now Minnesota has, I think, over 800 megawatts of community solar in operation that has grown over the past, since I think 2013, 2014.
Yeah. So entities would be able to create projects up to 5 megawatts. It would be smaller than a typical utility scale solar investment. So size does qualify the project a little bit as proposed here in these bills.
And what I've read also is that what community solar often means is more locally built projects too, because you don't have to look for these really large plots of land like utility scale. They can be smaller plots of land that are probably could be more locally generated, local to the community that is looking to build it, which is another benefit.
Yeah, and you could have partners who are adjacent to each other, say 3 or 4 businesses in a small business district that utilize their rooftop to generate solar energy. Or perhaps they will use a combination of their rooftop and maybe some covered parking spaces like we see at the MDOT Park and Ride. It really provides for a lot of creativity about where solar can go. And I think as Minnesota is an example of how it accelerates the different types of creative partnerships that can be brought to bear to fight climate change and to keep our energy costs manageable while maintaining our quality of life.
Yeah, and you mentioned energy costs. Will community solar customers save money on electricity? And do you have a sense about how much people might be able to save?
Yeah, data from projects across the nation indicates there's about a 10 to 15% window of savings that can be achieved by purchasing community solar. And then also you have the insurance of, and a little bit more personal control because that system is, it's answering to you, the subscriber. So you know where your energy is coming from and how it's generated and how it's benefiting the planet.
So beyond the benefits to customers, which are pretty clear, what are some of the other benefits of building community solar?
Well, I think that this will help to keep housing more affordable, and energy costs and housing are tightly tied together. Decentralized energy can also help us be more agile and help the grid out, so we aren't so dependent on a single source of energy. There are, I think we also see the benefit of a growing clean energy economy. These types of projects will, and our ability to do them in Michigan, are part of the work that we need to do as a state to signal that we are ready for the clean energy economy. We're ready for those green and clean jobs, and that in and of itself will have a great impact in the state, in my opinion. I think community solar will, if it is successful, will spill over into other pieces of our state's energy portfolio and help us to accelerate understanding how these projects work, technologies that can help us be prepared and more resilient in a changing climate.
The bill also includes language to ensure access to community solar subscriptions from low-income households and low-income service organizations. It's really great. It's really important to see this language included so that everyone can access the benefits of community solar. What might this look like? This, making sure that there is access.
Well, it means that we will provide a means through which entities that benefit from state investments and low-income housing projects will be able to incorporate clean energy into those projects in an affordable way, in a way that makes sense over time. So we may be investing, for instance, here in Grand Rapids, we have an organization called Dwelling Place that uses state, federal, and local philanthropic dollars, as well as, obviously income generation strategies to finance the development of more affordable housing units in the city. They are building a lot of 4 to 5 floor apartment housing units across the city in our neighborhood business districts, and the edges of our neighborhoods where properties are available. And a group like Dwelling Place would be able to incorporate solar on the rooftop of such a building. They may use it just for their own energy production, but they could also partner with a neighborhood business district nearby, schools or churches, to provide benefit to other partners as well.
Great. And so the Michigan Public Service Commission will be kind of figuring out the ways, like the financing options and incentives and outreach programs that can make sure that there are these benefits to low income communities and organizations.
Yeah, and I think they'll be tracking the types of projects that evolve and creating mechanisms of accountability to ensure that we're meeting our goals.
Great. And so, as you mentioned, you're representing Grand Rapids, you're a Democrat, and the companion community solar bill was introduced by Representative Hoitenga, from a Republican from Mitten in northern Michigan. It's really refreshing to see bipartisanship and working across the aisle in what can, often feel right now like a very divided political climate. How did you find common ground and start working together on these bills?
Well, before I came to the legislature, I spent about a decade working in the environmental movement, and we've known each other for quite some time because of that.
Yes.
During that time, we worked on the IRP in Michigan to drive clean energy forward. And we also did some work while I was at WEMIAC with our friends in Holland and the Holland Board of Power and Light regarding their efforts to deliver energy efficiency benefits to their ratepayers. So I learned then that on both sides of the aisle, there's this place, a sweet spot where we can really leverage some ideas around the marketplace and consumer choice and freedom and liberty to help to justify investments in clean energy. And it's in that space, I think, where Michelle and I are able to meet up and partner, I should say Rep. Hoitenga and I are able to partner up and bring a project like this forward. We all deserve the ability to manage our lives in the way that align with our values and our ethics, align with our autonomy and our desire to be independent. And community solar and other projects like it are one of those ways forward. And in this space, when Michigan's energy companies are so influential in Lansing, in the capital, it's really refreshing to see Rep. Hoitenga and others who have consumers and their freedom of choice and our collective future in mind, and feel that is more important than making sure that Consumers Energy and DTE's shareholders are benefited financially.
You mentioned WEMIAC and that our we've known each other and have crossed paths for a long time. And I was going to bring that up too, that, you have done a lot of work on environmental issues throughout your career, including serving as the executive director for WEMIAC, or the West Michigan Environmental Action Council, for 10 years. And that's where we first crossed paths. In fact, I remember going to a Women in the Environment conference that you organized in Grand Rapids years ago. That was so powerful. And I think one of the first climate related events that I had gone to, that I knew about in Michigan.
Yeah, right out of conservative West Michigan. We have this amazing legacy of environmental action and conservation, and it's really powerful. The Women in Environment events are still happening annually, although they've certainly changed in character as a result of COVID. But I think it's probably getting out to a broader audience online than it would in its physical form originally. So that's good news. We have a lot of work to do, though, to build women's leadership in the energy space, I think, in particular. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm particularly interested in the economic opportunities and signals that community solar would bring in Michigan, because I think with it will come those opportunities for women to really find pathways into the solar and clean energy industry.
Oh, I love that. And what are some other priorities that you would like to see move forward, especially related to climate and environment and justice as a state representative?
Yeah, for me and for the city of Grand Rapids, the sweet spot that I'm really passionate about, in that that really incorporates all three of those aspects of the triple bottom line, is around lead abatement in the state. In Grand Rapids, we have a really serious issue. We've worked really hard for about 25 years to reduce the rate of children identified with elevated lead blood levels. And unfortunately, we know that we're still poisoning a little over 400 kids a year in Grand Rapids and Kent County. And we know from all of our experiences with Flint and the conversation there, that 400 kids a year is far too many to be sending into early childhood with a lead exposure. So I've been part of those efforts from the get-go. I started my career as a neighborhood organizer before going into healthcare for a couple of minutes, and then ultimately to WEMIAC. And in all three of those spaces, very aware of the detrimental impact of lead exposures. Obviously, we see lead exposure, and we've talked a lot about it, become very familiar with lead exposures through our water pipes. But in the city of Grand Rapids, the main exposure is lead paint dust that's in our homes. Around 2012, I discovered that the same intervention that we have to eliminate lead in a home is the intervention we have in a home to eliminate energy loss. So there's this wonderful kind of, I would say, triple dip, bang for the buck, if you will, in investing in Michigan's older housing, homes built before 1978. And improving them significantly for energy loss reduction, making them tighter, more efficient, more affordable, and healthier homes. And at the same time, remediating lead exposures, ensuring that the home itself is a safe place for children to live and grow and thrive into their future. So, and when we do that, we see benefits to families. They become healthier. Fewer, trips to the emergency room for asthma attacks or respiratory issues. They reduce their costs of over-the-counter drugs, et cetera. And then, obviously, they're healthier and safer in their homes, so they're less transient. more able to stay because their energy bills are more affordable. And then, when we layer on the impacts of lead, their kids leave those homes ready to learn and grow in our school environments. And then that sets those families on a trajectory of success moving forward. Across Michigan, we only test about 14% of the kids who we know are susceptible to lead. So we have to step up quite a bit there. And
Mhm.
I really believe in the space, this green and healthy home space. So part of our work has been to invest several $1 million into Michigan Saves. Michigan Saves is an entity that has worked for just under 10 years now to provide affordable financing for energy efficiency and clean energy investments. So helping them with these dollars to develop a pilot project and then to expand that work is another way to keep that organizational sustainable over time and still generating the amazing outcomes that they do. My hope is that with Michigan Saves in place and robustly funded, both on the energy efficiency and clean energy side, and then also in lead abatement, that we can really deal with some of these long-term housing issues that we have, improve the quality of housing across the state. People are eligible for the benefits of Michigan Saves, whether they're a rental property owner or an individual property owner on a private property. And then, once we have these financing tools in place, I'm hopeful that we can also work with local foundations and other partners in the healthcare industry to make sure that we are providing interest rate buy downs or grant programs that will help families to accelerate their ability to get this work done, especially those families who are lower income in Michigan, which is a considerable amount of our population.
Wow, that is so important. The impacts of lead in our state are so huge in addressing this crisis of lead exposure in children is so huge. And tying it to, so I lived in the Detroit area when my firstborn was born, and we lived in an older home. And so I know from personal experience that it's windows and doors largely that is where the lead exposure comes from in a home, right? And so you're saying, replacing windows and doors is also a huge way to improve the energy efficiency of your home as well.
Yeah. And sometimes we're not even talking about replacement of those windows. We are talking about rehabbing them, containing lead on the sashes and sills of the window, and making sure that a family can be safe there. But it's to the point, like that intervention is windows and doors are also places where people are commonly losing a lot of energy, right?
Mhm.
So so once we tighten up those spaces in those homes, once we touch them, we can really have a multi-pronged impact on a family's health in a home, both financial health as well as their physical health.
So then getting back to the community solar bills, what is the process from here to pass these bills? You have the hearing coming up on October 26th, right?
Yeah, the week of, I believe it's that week we'll have a hearing. We're not quite sure what the date is. Hearing October 27th, potentially.
Okay.
We will be at the Energy Committee, and so if individuals are interested in providing letters of support, or even coming to Lansing to testify, or perhaps testifying over Zoom if you're not able to drive to Lansing, we would love to hear from you so that we can make sure we accommodate you in our agenda. Letters and emails to the Energy Policy Committee would be appreciated as well. Anyway, phone calls, any myriad of ways that you can communicate with the decision makers who are going to be at that table, and let them know how community solar could benefit you and your family, and your desire to see the state move forward with solutions that allow people to access more solar energy and gain benefits from it as well. Once it is approved in the House, it'll move on to the Senate. So we'll have to advocate for the bill to be picked up in the Senate, and then ultimately heads to the governor's desk. I can't speak for the governor, but I have a sense she would be happy to sign these bills.
Wonderful. And you feel pretty optimistic about that these bills will make it all the way through to the governor's desk?
I'm hopeful. We have seen a little bit of a stall on another related bill, the solar cap bill. We am hopeful that that community solar will be able to move forward as the thing that we do in this legislature to achieve clean energy. We'll have to see how it goes, and I think citizen voices, business leader voices are going to be very, very, very important as we move forward, and making sure that committee members are accountable to the people of Michigan and deciding our path forward on clean energy.
Anything else that you want to add that we haven't covered today?
I don't think so. I think we're in good shape.
Thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for leading with community solar bills and for all of your work.
Oh, I appreciate it. And thank you, Kate, for your leadership on climate in Michigan. We need your voice and the voice of all the folks who you're partnering with to create such a dynamic network that'll help move us forward. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Speaking of Resilience podcast. You can find more episodes of the Speaking of Resilience podcast at our website, groundworkcenter.org/podcast, miclimateaction.org/podcast, or on all major podcast platforms. If you appreciate this content and want more of it, stay up to date by subscribing to the podcast wherever you listen in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review. This helps other listeners find the Speaking of Resilient podcast. Like us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Groundwork Center and at MI Climate Action. Speaking of Resilience is created by the Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities and the Michigan Climate Action Network. This episode was produced by Taylor Kramer of Cold Shower Media in collaboration with Nick Loud of the Boardman Review.